Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Well, it's Thursday, so it's time for another market update to see how the freight market has changed week over week. As always, we're going to start by looking at general information such as volumes, rejections in the general market. Then we'll take a look at diesel prices, capacity in terms of the number of MCs, and then we will focus on what is happening on the spot market specifically for dry vans, reefers, and flatbeds. Now, right after this video, I'm going to upload another video about IFTA because every single time I release a market update, when I show the diesel price chart with raw diesel prices, everyone is confused about how it's possible that certain states are considered cheaper when it comes to raw diesel prices than others. So IFTA video coming right after this one. Ready? Let's go. All right, as always, all the charts are attached right here. Let's go through it. So, in terms of the general volume in the general market, it actually decreased week over week and is 4.08% lower than this time last week. Rejections are continuing to climb. I know that this week shows 7.6. At this point, it's closer to 8% rejection level, which is a 26.67% increase week over week. The increases are pretty significant considering, and the only thing that can explain them is that the capacity on the contract side is seeing decreases. All right, now spot volume and spot rates for the general market for all equipment types. And this is comparing last week to the week before. Unfortunately, the data is 1 week delayed. So spot volume for all equipment types increased by 7.7%. And spot rates, if we consider all equipment types, also increased by around 2 cents per mile. All right, let's take a look at the diesel map to see what's going on with the price of diesel. As you can see, Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Mississippi are the cheapest if we're looking at the price at the pump. The most expensive is California at $5 and about 14 cents on average, which is crazy. But as always, it's the West Coast and the Northeast that are the most expensive. All right, what about raw diesel prices? And again, that IFTA video is coming right after, which will explain why sometimes it can be more beneficial to refuel in a state where the price might seem higher. But that's for another video. Raw IFTA prices, nothing changes. Washington, Oregon, California, and Nevada, as well as the Northeast, are still the most expensive. Usually what we see is that Illinois is the least expensive, but this time around, Illinois prices increased, unfortunately, to the point where it's in line with states like Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and so on. All right, let's take a look at diesel prices from another view. So week over week, diesel prices did decrease ever so slightly, not even 1 cent per gallon. Month over month, they're about 17 cents higher, but year over year, they're about 10 cents lower per gallon. Okay, capacity-wise. Capacity, I don't have good news for you guys this week. And part of the reason, I do apologize, I don't have that chart this time around, but part of the reason is that revocations actually decreased significantly from what they have been all year, which means not as many people are closing down or getting their authority shut down. But yeah, in terms of the net change in carrier population, we see that as of last Friday, it's a 275 carrier increase week over week, and the white line is as close to zero as possible. Okay, let's take a look at what is happening with the spot market, and we're going to start with dry vans. So week over week, and I do apologize right off the bat, this is not for the week ending on June 20th. This is for the week ending on June 27th. So for the week ending on June 27th, dry vans saw about a 5 cent per mile increase on average on the spot market, but rates year over year are 2% lower. Volumes also saw an increase, 10.4%, but are about 8% lower than this time last year. So weekly data shows improvement, but if we compare year over year, yeah, it's worse this year than it was last year. Now, in terms of load volumes, this is a map I make using truck stop data, and this shows us where the load volumes are predominantly for dry vans on the spot market. The darker an area is, the more volume comes out of that state. So Texas is the place with the most volume for dry vans, followed by California, Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. However, in general, more of the volume comes from the Midwest, South, and East Coast for dry vans. In terms of load to truck ratios, if we're looking at the data that Truck Stop provides, we can see that a lot of this map is red. The shade of red tells you how much of an overcapacity it is. If it's darker, it's more overcapacity. If it's a lighter red, it's less overcapacity, but still overcapacity. Now you can see that if we look at the bottom of the map, it's pretty much the southern states that have equilibrium in yellow, with the exception of places like North Dakota, Wyoming, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. And the only state that has 2.34 loads per truck, which is slight undercapacity, slightly more loads than there are trucks, is South Carolina. But let's take a look at what DAT shows in terms of the MCI, or Motor Carrier Index, which shows us how often do brokers search for dry vans in a market versus how often do dry van carriers or drivers search for a load in those markets. The redder it is, the more skewed it is to the carrier's favor. So there is an undercapacity issue, right? Brokers need those trucks more in theory than the trucks need those loads. Those places are Southern California, the Fort Worth, Dallas, Austin area, and then some of the Southeast. Anything blue is complete overcapacity. This is where brokers are not even trying to search for trucks because they don't have loads to sell. You can see some parts of Pennsylvania are also red, Ohio, and then the Midwest in general is equilibrium, more or less. All right, let's take a look at reefers now. So for the week ending on June 27th, not June 20th, reefers actually saw a pretty significant increase in the average rate per mile by 15 cents per mile on average on the spot market. Year over year, however, it's still 0.04% lower. Now, volumes week over week for reefers increased an astronomical amount, 32.2%. Year over year, volumes are also 1.4% higher for reefers on the spot market. In terms of load volumes, according to truck stop data, we can see that most load volumes come out of California, Texas, Georgia, and Illinois for reefers, but also some of the Midwest and East Coast, as well as some of the Southeast. In terms of load to truck ratio, you can see that there is also quite a bit of red on this map, which is overcapacity, but there's also a lot of equilibrium for reefers. Now, there are two states that have slight undercapacity, Arkansas and Iowa, 2 to 3 loads per truck, and North Dakota and Delaware have 3 to 4 loads per truck. But again, this doesn't mean that these are amazing places to be because there is no volume in a place like North Dakota, and Delaware is just surrounded by trucks all around. Delaware is a small state. So let's take a look at the MCI index by DAT. All right, anything red is good, right? So we can see that California is heating up for reefers. The northern part of California is also starting to heat up, but the best place is, of course, Southern California. Now you can see places like Phoenix, Tucson, and probably Nogales, Arizona are also starting to heat up a little bit. It's also the Southeast that is hot for reefers. Where you don't want to be, which surprises me week after week, is Washington and Oregon. My goodness, Washington and Oregon were places where we could get such good loads about this time of year when we were operating reefers, but they remain cool markets where there are just not enough loads. Let's take a look at flatbeds. So flatbeds actually did see a small increase on the load board in terms of the rate per mile. And again, this is June 27th, the week ending on June 27th. But the difference was so tiny, it wasn't even a cent, that I just put zeros here. So it was an increase technically, but it was absolutely minuscule and insignificant. Year over year, flatbeds are seeing a 2% increase in rates. Volumes also went up by 1.7% week over week and are 37% higher than this time last year. All right, let's take a look at what is happening with the flatbed loads in terms of where are the load volumes. And honestly, this map, it does vary, of course, from week to week slightly, but the pattern is the same. It's the South. Texas has the most amount of loads for flatbeds on the spot market, and generally it's the South and the Midwest, and California is always the outlier. Now, in terms of load to truck ratios, yeah, again, it's very similar to what we have been seeing. If we divide the map in half, the northern part is over capacity. There are just not enough flatbed loads there. And the bottom half is the southern part is a better area to be if you have a flatbed. A new under capacity area this week is the state of Maryland, but it's surrounded by so much overcapacity that you are not going to get a great rate there unless you're looking to go to somewhere like Florida. Now, the better states are always Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. That's just simply because it's really difficult to get to those states if you are running from somewhere like Oregon, California, or anywhere other than Texas. Let's be real. It's very difficult to get, especially to Mississippi, which has currently almost 14 loads per truck. All right, in terms of data versus experience, I will be making a separate video at some point because there was an experience that unfortunately was horrible. It was not pleasant at all, but it was a fantastic learning experience. I'm just not ready to talk about it quite yet. But in terms of the market itself, I can tell you just in general, for the month of June, we have seen that our gross income has decreased. Not by much, but it has decreased. It was much more difficult booking loads in the month of June. The rate per mile stayed more or less the same as it was in May. Now, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with where we ran. We tried to stay away in the month of June from places like the West Coast or the Northeast with the flatbed, but something we realized is that the markets that are workable, they started decreasing. Again, I used to rely very much on places like Missouri, Illinois, even Wisconsin and Minnesota, at times Indiana for sure, in order to grab good loads going to the South. At this point, those loads have become scarce. So the month of June was definitely tricky for us. It was a little bit more challenging. Month of July, it's too early to tell. Plus, this week is a short week because of Independence Day. That's coming up tomorrow. So happy Independence Day to you guys. But yeah, I'm very curious to see how July pans out and how it changes week over week. I'm very curious to hear what you guys are experiencing on the market, whether you're a dry van operator, reefer, flatbed, or even if you're specialized. I'm just very, very curious to hear what are the other experiences on this market, because for me, it was a little bit more challenging. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining and watching. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your week and weekend. Happy Independence Day, happy 4th of July, and I'll see you in the next video.